Test.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a moment. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming out on this June 25th evening. We do not normally, well, in July, we do not hold any meetings. This time of year, it's really hard to get people out because everybody's doing family things, and that's a good thing. But we also have a very, very important topic tonight. We're really excited for the presentation because it's going to be a panel, and I think it's going to be really fascinating. So are we live? Are we recording? Okay, how close are we to going live? Because we don't want. But you can start recording, right? Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So anyway, my name is Tina Horlocker, and I'm the chair of the Davis County Conservatives. We are an organization that is probably about 5 years old now. You can find us on Facebook on Davis County Conservatives. Please join our Facebook page. You can also look us up on YouTube, and you can see the recordings of our events, which we really try to bring really pertinent events that impact our lives, because one of our purposes is to educate our community, but it's also to build community. We love people to come, not just to watch us, because we want you to get to know each other so we can feel a companionship on the road that we're currently on. Another purpose for our organization is to find people to run for political office. So obviously we just had an election. I'm going to speak about that in just a moment. But we have another election coming up next year. So if any of you feel inclined to run for a political office, we would love to assist you in understanding how to do that and just helping you in any way that we can, so long as you meet the standards that we adhere to, which basically is the platform of the Republican Party. So thank you for coming tonight. And we are going to start with a prayer before I forget anything else. Ben Spencer, member of our board.
Our loving Father in heaven, we assemble this evening to learn and help influence good policy in our community. Are thankful for the abundance that we enjoy. We are aware that we are blessed beyond measure, and we express our desire to help bless others with the abundance that we enjoy, and we ask that thy Spirit will inspire us to have useful dialogue, and say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
All right, let's say the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would all please stand with me. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Before we get started, I just wanted to ask how many of you are aware of the outcome of the election over the last weekend? Is there anybody who's not aware? Okay, so our primary election obviously was last Tuesday, and we had about 13% of all registered Republicans vote. That's a pretty low number when you consider the population at large. So it's really important. And another thing it shows is the value of the caucus and convention system, because it's so hard for people to be informed. We try so hard to inform people on candidates that are running so that they can make good choices. We had a couple of really good wins. We got John Taylor elected down in Syracuse 7, District 7. No, sorry, 14. We got John Atkins for sheriff. We're super excited about that. We got Stuart Adams out. And we have Stephanie Hollis, who was elected. She's here tonight. And there are a couple of other really good wins that are not right here in Davis County. One of them was Dan McKay. He's out. That's another huge win. Oh, we got Susan Lee. Thank you. I know I was forgetting someone. We got Susan Lee. So is there anyone else I forgot? Yeah, so we got 2 commissioners. Yeah. So that's pretty awesome. But we need to start thinking about next year. And I just want to put a little bug in your ear. Next year is going to be the organizing convention of the Republican Party. Obviously, we are affiliated with the Republican Party. And so we're going to be elected party officers for the county, for the state, and state central committee members. These are important positions that have a lot of effect on our elections, primarily, and policy. We always want to affect good policy. And so those are a lot of the purposes as to why we're here. Okay, I've already talked your head off. So does anyone have a question? I would like to implore you all to invite people to come to our event. We're off for July. Thursday is going to be, or not Thursday, August is going to be about education. Our first week is going to be on homeschooling. Our fourth, we meet the second and fourth Thursday, 6:30 p.m., always here. But that second Thursday is going to be on something education-wise. So look around you, invite people. We try to give the best information. So I am now going to turn the time over to Jen Garner, who has pretty much planned this evening, and she's going to introduce our panel and run the questions. And then, Jen, I'm sure people can ask questions. We do have a bucket or a can that we send around for donations. We donate to candidates and that kind of thing. If you're not on our email list, please sign that.
These are a couple of email sign-up sheets, and if you want to have a flyer to give out to your friends, let them know about our event. We have these as well.
Thank you so much for coming. With the Strata Center and not having all of the information about water, we felt that having a public forum on water would be important from different aspects, because I think, you know, humans need water, so we should probably ask more humans. especially people that are experts in their field. And so we have really tried to bring in different points of view so that we can understand. Stephanie and I and Tina, did you come with us? We went to, and Ben, we went and Ron, we went to tour what's happening west or out by Antelope Island with some airboat association people that have been watching what's happening at the lake out there and listening to their concerns. But this is bringing more information from different points of view. So we're going to start with, we have 6 panelists. Each of them are going to take a few minutes to introduce themselves, what parts they're seeing. They're going to take about 5 minutes each. And then we'll ask them to come up on stage. And then I have some questions for them. And then if we have any more questions from the general public, then let's get down to it. So thank you. Travis Padilla, thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Travis Padilla. I am a citizen volunteer with Grow the Flow, along with my wife. We are community organizers here in Weber and Davis County. We have awesome yard signs. You might start seeing them more often. So our group is focused on community engagement, talking to people about what they can do to help save the lake, and also educating what's going on with the lake. So obviously that kind of all got thrown into this whirlwind with the data center, and we kind of also got thrown in the middle of that because we wanted to be involved in that. So we helped facilitate numerous town halls from Box Elder to Salt Lake County, trying to educate people. We ran one with Stuart Adams, Stephanie Hollis, and Braden Hess in Sunset right before the election. And I feel like the lake is a winning issue for politicians, and this past election proved it. If you're going to support the lake, it's going to likely help your cause to win elections. It's a popular issue. 85% of Utahns care about the Great Salt Lake. It's our identity. It's our home. That lake means our air. I have a very different view than all these other panelists, right? I volunteer for this community organization, trying to talk to people about the lake. So I want to give you what's going on with the lake right now. I apologize. I do have to leave early tonight. I have to make my son's baseball playoff game. Both Jennifer and Stephanie have my phone number. Please give it out to anybody if they have questions. You know how much I love talking about the lake. So right now the lake is at 34% of a healthy level. The healthy level of the lake, which would eliminate most dust hotspots, which you've probably heard about, is 4,198 feet. Today we sit under 4,192, and we are likely going to get close to that 4,188 all-time low. We can't predict short-term weather, so depending on if these monsoons hit because El Nino's coming in, that could be a big savior for this late summer for us. We don't know though. On our current path, we need to conserve. We've done the math. We don't need more water. We don't need more reservoirs. We don't need really anything except to use less water. Utahns, on average, consume twice as much water per capita than anybody else in the nation. We use way more water than everybody else. And that's crazy because we live in a desert. So we've run the math. We've looked at it, and we need to get 770,000 acre feet of water extra to the lake each year. What does that mean? These guys know what that means. Most of you know. Imagine a football field covered in 1 foot of water and needing 770,000 of those getting to the lake each year to get to the 2034 promise by Governor Cox, Stuart Adams, and Mike Schultz. So that's a lot of water. How are we going to do that? We all need to conserve water, whether we're municipal users or agricultural users. Most of us in this room are likely municipal users. So we have a little effect on what we can do. We can rip up our lawns, we can rip up park strips, we can water less. My lawn's a nice gold color at this point. I'm watering twice a week, 15 minutes a day, probably gonna go up to 3 times a week. So I understand the need for grass, I understand the need for green. but it's how do we interact with water on a daily basis. Yeah, so if you want to get involved with a group looking to save the Great Salt Lake specifically, Grow the Flow is one of many. There is a large coalition of groups from Ducks Unlimited to the Grow the Flow to Utah Rivers Council and other folks. So there's a place for everybody to do your part for the lake and try and save the lake. Anything I missed? Sorry, I don't know the format. No, we're just waiting. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ron Mortensen. And I'm an elected trustee of the South Davis Water District. And so we provide both irrigation and culinary water to our customers. And tonight I just want to touch on 3 points. Mine is more some of the political aspects of this and everything else. And so, first of all, it's important to remember that legislators who run water bills often have a conflict of interest, and they often have hidden agendas. And so when we see bills, we have to really look in depth at those bills. Second thing I want to talk about, there's no simple one-size-fits-all solution to the restoring the Great Salt Lake. And sometimes you hear the politicians talk, and they'll give you the idea that they can do it just this wonderful thing that they've come up with. And finally, when we do attempt to get more water to the Great Salt Lake, we have to do no harm to those upstream and make it measurable. We need to know what the water we're conserving is, where it's going once we conserve it. And it's always important to know who the sponsors of the bills are and who they're employed by. And early on, some of the major bills of the Great Salt Lake were run by a legislator who happened to be a major, he was employed by the brine shrimp industry. And so, yes, it's important to get water to the lake, but when he comes from his point of view, it's different from maybe his reasons are different from some of the others. And so it's important to know that, where they're coming from. And secondly, for example, the House sponsor of the bill that required us to put water meters on their pressurized irrigation water, if you look at that bill carefully, you'll find out in that bill, there is a provision put in the bill that allows an irrigation district in his area to be exempted from putting meters on, and they actually exercise that exemption, whereas everyone else was required to do that. So when you see bills, you have to look at them carefully and figure out where the sponsor's coming from and who has influence on them. The second thing is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the Great Salt Lake. And we all want to do our part, and we all want to restore the lake, but we have to look at the lake as a part of a very complex surface and groundwater system throughout the entire watershed and weigh the needs and interests of everyone in that watershed. And unfortunately, the legislatures failed to do that, and it's cobbled together a bunch of patchwork, simple one-size-fits-all solutions. And for example, they required that water meters be placed on all pressurized secondary water connections in order to get more water to the Great Salt Lake. And that will conserve water, and that water will go to the Great Salt Lake. But they didn't take into consideration the key role that imported Weber water plays in maintaining our aquifers in certain areas. And none of the bills that they passed have any requirement or any way to track the water that we've conserved. So we don't know where that water goes or who's benefiting from it. So they need to tie this whole system together. And unfortunately, the last point is that legislators have failed to ensure that their legislation does not harm those upstream from the lake. You know, curtailing the use of irrigation water will harm a lot of aquifers, and it threatens century-old lifestyles even. So before any attempts to raise the lake level must ensure that no harm is done to the complex water systems that have been developed over the last 180 years to support Utah's farming and urban communities. And failure to do that may result in irreversible harm. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jake Ferguson. I'm the general manager of the South Davis Water District. Recognize one gentleman out here, the manager for an irrigation district. We actually do both culinary and irrigation water, mainly in southern Davis County, Bountiful, North Salt Lake, Woods Cross, West Bountiful, that area. I'll be speaking mainly to that. So we're an interesting district because we do both waters. Not a lot of systems do that in Utah. And so as all this conservation has started down in our area, we've started seeing issues with the culinary side of things. And that's one problem in Utah is you have these two systems and they don't really communicate. And for example, Bountiful Irrigation doesn't really know what's happening with the aquifer, but we do because we've got 6 wells and 4 springs, and we notice as water starts to drop. And so we started doing some research and some study. So this is one of my slides. So our area, so the aquifer I'm talking about is called the Bountiful Sub Aquifer. And so we live in, it's mainly just one big aquifer, but this is one area of the aquifer that USGS has named it that. And so that's what we've been studying. So it serves a population of about 110,000. We've noticed that the aquifer, and this is going off USGS test wells, that the aquifer has been dropping at an average of 1.37 feet per year, which is very alarming. So just to give you an idea, each foot that drops is roughly 2,000 acre feet using a specific yield. We won't go into that, but a 12% specific yield. So that's about 36,000 acre feet of water over 13 years that we've lost. That's a lot of water. That's drinking water. So even as dirty water, secondary water, goes into the ground, it's cleaned. It's a giant filter. You know, it travels 200 feet into the ground and it's actually being cleaned and scrubbed. And we can pump that directly out and use that water. So that's lost water. The aquifer has dropped 18 feet since 2012. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but there's been a lot of ground subsidence where homes have been sinking in the Woods Cross, West Bountiful, North Salt Lake area. That is because of this. Because the water that once soaked in this clay is now going down, and so the clay layers are collapsing. And so we're seeing homes actually sink into the ground. So scary things. And that's why we've done this analysis. If I can get this to work. Yeah, it's not working. This stuff never, yeah, I did. This stuff never, oh, there it is. All right, so this is just an illustration that shows how the aquifer interfaces with the Great Salt Lake. You've got the mountains, you get your precipitation, your snow melt goes into the ground, into the aquifer, and then slowly, very slowly travels down to the Great Salt Lake, where it mixes. Mostly, a lot of it evaporates. And there's actually, a lot of the Great Salt Lake actually has some fresh water coming out of it. I don't know if you guys have heard about that. But because the salt water is so dense, the fresh water has a tendency to float kind of on the surface and will sometimes come up. The U of U actually just did a study on this, and they were able to determine how much pressure is pushing on the culinary side of the water up into the Great Salt Lake. Let's go to the next one here. Okay, deficit. So, and again, I'm speaking to the aquifer area in our area, southern Davis County. I don't know what it's like here, so don't panic. But right now we're seeing a deficit of approximately 6,000 acre feet every year. We're pumping more, about 1.8 times more water out of the aquifer than it can handle. So this is how we came up with the calculation. Our recharge about 17,000 acre feet every year. And then you have to have a flow into the Great Salt Lake. That's 9,700. That amount of fresh water pushes back the salt. That's a buffer and pushes against the salt water and keeps it from coming in. The safe yield is how much we can pump every year. And we're pumping about 13,500. So we've got that 6,000 acre foot deficit. Sorry, I'm still fighting the smoke from the last few days. It's really bugging my throat. So when the fresh water weakens, the salt begins to mix in that fresh water. We are actually seeing wells, even some on the bench area, that are getting some salt in them, saltwater intrusion, because as the aquifer is dropping, the fresh water is dropping. It's not able to keep that salt water back. It's called a curtain. Excuse me. Thanks. So now this is where it gets a little more interesting. So our we rely on, and this kind of touches on what Ron was talking about. We use a lot of Weber Basin water, as does everybody along the Wasatch Front. This water is imported 30 miles from the Weber River. This is import water. This is water that we use, both secondary and culinary. The secondary soaks down through the ground, recharges the aquifer that way. The treated culinary water just replaces the drinking water that we would have pumped out of the ground for drinking water. So right now, there's a big push for Weber Basin to purchase contracts of surplus secondary water. And then they take this water and no one really knows where that water's gone so far. For example, Bountiful Irrigation has just sold some secondary water to Weber Basin, and we're not sure exactly where that water went, but we know it's not going into the ground in our area. So this is very concerning because with secondary metering, everyone's pushing for conservation, but that conservation actually takes that import water away from us, which our area has grown with. And so that's a big problem that we're seeing. Our secondary water deliveries have dropped 28%, mostly due to conservation, drought because of conservation, a lot of it. Sorry, I'm going over time. I think that's my last one. Anyway, so that's kind of what I'm interested in and what we've been studying and our concern, and that's where we kind of push back with people who just think conservation, take water away. That's not always the best solution. That can cause problems. What we need to do is mitigate the culinary issues, the aquifer issues, and then we can start pulling that water. Anyway, that's all I have.
Well, it's my turn to talk. Now I'm this mic up so you can hear me. My name is Douglas Hanson, and I'm a water user. I'm a farmer from Weber County, western Weber County, and I use water. And I use the water on my farm, similar to what's been done for the 150 years ago by the pioneers, and that's flood irrigation. I can't afford a sprinkler system, and we flood irrigate and have been in my that area for generations. We're in the 5th generation, and we're still flood irrigating. Now, there's some questions about farmers and their use of water, and you may have heard 4 years ago in 2022 how farmers waste water and how farmers are been demonized because we don't use water very well, and we're the bad guys. And a lot of Utah water goes to agriculture. Well, if you look around the Great Salt Lake watershed, a lot of the water that used to be used by farmers is not. And if you've been here many years, probably more than 20 or 30 years, you just have to look at simple changes in our culture. West Layton, West Kaysville, you're familiar with those areas. If you've been here a while, back in the, I've been here since the 60s and 70s, 1970s, 1980s, there was a lot of produce grown out west. That ground was very fertile, deep fertile soil, and could grow almost any vegetable. So onions were grown, beans were grown, tomatoes were grown, other vegetables were grown, from carrots, celery wasn't, but there's a lot of things that were grown there. Now, if you go out west Layton, West Kaysville, what do you see? How many farms do you see? Now, they were all flood irrigated until about the 70s when sprinklers started. So before that, for over 100 years, that was flood irrigated. Now it's not. My question, where did the water go? If all those farmers used to flood irrigate all that, and we do up in Weber County very similar, the farms are gone, the produce is gone, the food is gone, where's the water? Nobody has come up with this answer to that. They just say farmers use too much water and farmers are wasting water. Well, all those farmers out there don't exist anymore. So where's the waste? I still water in Weber County. You know what? I try really hard not to waste water. Here's an issue. When I flood irrigate, and you look at your garden and think big garden. So I've got big fields. When I flood irrigate, that water goes from the source through my ditches out into the field. Now, several things happen to that water, and you tell me if it's wasted. Okay, obviously, it's on the surface, so there's evaporation. The water goes into the soil, translocated into the plant, goes up into the plant, it grows the produce, whatever I'm growing, and out of the leaves, it's transpired into the atmosphere, which puts moisture and humidity into the atmosphere. Now, is that a waste? Depends on how you look at it. Okay, then it percolates into the soil through capillary action, and has been said by Jake, it goes into the deep water, into the aquifer. There's a lot of that. So when you flood irrigate, it just doesn't rush over the ground. It goes deep, and it soaks in, and it goes deeper and deeper. And over time, that percolates down into the aquifer. And where does it go from the aquifer? Where does that water go once it hits that aquifer? As the picture showed, where does it go? Out to that pond out there. Now let's talk about what people think is wastewater. All that surface water comes off my field, goes into a ditch called a drain ditch. Now you drive around out west, and it used to be in this area, there was a lot of drain ditches. What did they do? They drained water off fields, because you can't have standing water. Your garden, you can't have standing water in your garden. You want it to drain off. So it either goes into the soil or it drains off the end to somewhere. Well, those drain ditches go out west. If you've been here a while, you've seen that drain ditches go to bigger drain ditches, go to bigger drain ditches. Guess where they end up? Where? That Great Salt Lake. So the farmers take the water from the mountain, as was depicted, stop it for a little while to produce food and fiber, and then the rest of it goes out to the lake. So farmers are wasting water. Tell me where. Now you figure it out. You just got to think about it. Where is it wasted? Because all our excess water goes out to the drain ditch and ends up in the Great Salt Lake. So we farmers are helping recharge the lake. Why isn't it being recharged? Somebody else is stopping it because all those farms that used to be here 50 years ago, all that water went out into the lake, kept going out into the lake. So we were helping the Great Salt Lake. But 4 years ago, 2022, we were accused of wasting water. We were accused of a lot of things. And then there's certain groups decided they wanted to take our water rights, farmers' water rights. It was couched in various ways, but they wanted to use all the excess water rights that farmers weren't using. And there's some, but most of the farmers who are flood irrigating use their water right. And if they're pumping, they're still using their water right. The problem with pumping and drip irrigation is that it doesn't percolate deep. No deep watering, it's surface. And they have modern ways to do that. That's better. Modern ways so that they can calculate the moisture content of the root zone of the crop, whether it's corn, alfalfa, grass, beans, onions, whatever it is. So they gauge how much water to put on that based on the measurement from those gauges at the root zone. And so they apply that water very conservatively, so just enough to water the plants. That's it. Very little runoff, very little percolation deep. No deep watering. So there's no recharge of the sub-water. There is no waste, water runoff that goes into a drain ditch that goes out to the lake. So that stopped it. So these modern conveniences are great. It produces a lot of things, but it shorts the water system. So now farmers are trying to do their best to raise crops, food, and fiber. I get a field out here in Weber County that's about 50 acres of onions. Now, who eats onions? Oh, yeah. A lot of us eat onions. Well, that's for local market and extended market. There are a lot of dairies out in Weber County that had to have corn and alfalfa and other things, produce, to go in to feed the cows so they can get milk. And a lot of that milk was for local consumption. So their dairies went out. So there's your food supply. Is now there's fewer farmers here, fewer farmers there, all across the Great Salt Lake aquifer watershed. Fewer farmers. So all that benefit the farmers gave to the deep water, to the runoff water, to the lake, has stopped. Where did it go? That's the question I have. Where did that water go? The last 50 years as farms diminished, few farmers were flood irrigated. Where did that water go? Well, it went to municipalities and manufacturing. Had to. Where else would it go? Well, even the governor's office talked about how much water agriculture uses. And there has been expansion in Utah. Down in Delta area, they raise a lot of feed, alfalfa and other things, other areas of Utah. But here on the Wasatch Front, it's been diminishing. So do we use a lot of water in this part of Utah? We still use a lot of water, but it's not the 80% claimed, because I've watched it diminish. And you just look out here. If you've been here a while, you know those farmers are gone. They used to flood irrigate. That water is not used for flood irrigation. Where's the water? Okay, now you ask yourself, what has grown around this area, even here, all over Layton and Kaysville in the last 20 years? What's grown? What's been grown? Houses, commercial, manufacturing, other things. Where does the water go? Okay, that's the question. Have to figure that out. So mine's saying the farmers are supporting the Great Salt Lake, so don't crush on us, because we're still trying to send our excess water to the Great Salt Lake. The rest goes into a plant or down into deep water. So, where does it go? Now, the other thing I ask, and I've heard this, Travis, anyway, about changing your landscaping around. Take out the trees, take out the lawn, because they use a lot of water. put in those beautiful rocks. They're magnificent. I've seen rocks in Arizona around Phoenix, you know, those rock yards. Beautiful landscaping. If you like cactus, it works. If you're like us, we started raising lawns long ago because it looked better than rocks. Okay, so they want to take that out so you can save water, and you can save water on your landscaping. Where's that water going? At the same time, county commissioners are approving a lot of developments. Okay, Weber County, there's now a proposal for a 350-acre development, 550-acre development, and there's a 700-acre development going on right now. It's slowly building houses, commercial, residential, industrial. That's going in. Well, no more farmers, no more water out to the lake, Great Salt Lake. Where's the water going? And why are they adding, county commissioners and others, why are they approving these kind of building permits to increase the water users? These are increased water users. So you're asked to cut your water as they add more water users. Does that make sense? And now we got, you know, the big, you know, what is the big water users, industrial, the one in Box Elder County, they got the one out here in Weber County, they got all these things that are going to use water, manufacturing, the data centers down in the point of the mountain, all this water users. So give up your water, give up your lawns, give up your trees, make it hot around your house, take all that lawn out where it cools it down, and cut off your water so we can have data centers, so we can have all these users. And guess what else is using water in the last 5 years I've seen just mushroom. You go around, how many car washes do you see? Do they recycle their water? Where does that water go? How come we have so many more car washes? Because you want clean cars. And so they're meeting the need. But they use water, don't they? Last time I checked. Where does that water go? Where does it come from? Somebody's providing them water. Somebody's approving these new developments to use more water. And then they say, oh, you conserve your water. Just don't use as much. Don't use any. I'm sorry, Travis, you slow the flow, but we've got to have all that water go out to the lake, but it's not. It's going somewhere else. So, as a farmer, in summary, we're trying to support the lake with the water we use. It goes, like I said, in various places, but it's not wasted. And all our excess water eventually gets out to the lake. So farmers are supporting the lake. So we're trying to help. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I am so happy to be here. I'm just going to have a timer. I like to walk around. I hope that's okay. I'll try not to walk off camera too much. Okay, great. I'm Zach Frankel. I'm the founder and executive director of the Utah Rivers Council. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We started in 1994. I know what you're thinking. I was 12 years old, yes. And we work on the nexus between water and economics, between science and water policy, and between the State House and how we plan for water. And so I'm lucky to be joined here by Aiden, our wonderful colleague here at Utah Rivers Council, Great Salt Lake Waterkeeper. And I want to talk a little bit about water, because having done this a long time now for a living, you know, there's this phrase, and I apologize to Stephanie for saying this because it's a little diss on politicians, but, you know, they say that, you know, to get elected, you kiss babies, right? To get elected, right? You kiss boomers. And after the 2022 record Great Salt Lake low, the media outside Utah just looked to Utah and created all this scrutiny and criticism on Utah for the record low of the Great Salt Lake. And so after 2022, to get elected, you kiss babies and you talk about how much you care about the Great Salt Lake. And unfortunately, our state house is not really working on passing substantive bills to save the Great Salt Lake, and it's disappearing. And in fact, there is a plan to dry up the Great Salt Lake. And we've been saying this for decades. Why? Because we've been lobbying legislators in that building since 1994. And when we'd say the Great Salt Lake needs water, they'd say, no, you're wrong. Water entering the lake is wasted. And I'd have long arguments. I remember I went to a planning meeting in 1999. And there, it started off, there was a water, transportation, and open space. No, it was after that. But it was around 1999. And there, in this planning meeting, was former US Senator Jake Garn. And a very polite man, never met him before. And we started talking water. And we had this really long argument. And at the beginning of this planning meeting, there were like 50 people in this room and these little planning charrettes, divvying up to separate topics. And Senator Garn and I were in the water circle. And we started arguing about whether water entering the Great Salt Lake was wasted. And I'll never forget, I was really grateful for this conversation because he said to me, Sonny, you're totally out of touch. Most people think water entering the Great Salt Lake is wasted. And I said, with all due respect, Senator Garn, you're the one who's out of touch. Most people want water entering the Great Salt Lake. So there is a belief system about whether we should share water with the Great Salt Lake. There was a poll done recently and found that water was the sixth highest priority for Utahns running out of water. But protecting the Great Salt Lake was 17th on the list, okay? So we need to decide if we are going to live alongside that Great Salt Lake, because not delivering water to the Great Salt Lake is the absolute most expensive alternative for our future, because the dust will require $20 to $30 billion of construction costs to mitigate, to adhere to federal air quality laws, to protect ourselves from that toxic dust. And so that's the costs of failure at the Great Salt Lake. And we're not willing to share water with the Great Salt Lake because of what we've heard a lot about tonight, which is what we call water hardening. So our organization is supportive of water conservation. In 1998, I wrote the Water Conservation Plan Act of Utah, which we got passed. I asked Representative Judy Buffmeyer to run the bill, and it passed. And so it's one of the municipal water conservation standards. Water conservation across the United States is part and parcel with water delivery, and there are so much sophistication to it. But the idea that if we just conserve water, it's getting water to the lake is not true. And Doug explored that really well. When we conserve water, but we don't share it with the Great Salt Lake, what we're doing is we're hardening the system. And agriculture is, from flood irrigation, is sloppy because they're flood irrigating, and the return flows go back to the Great Salt Lake. So when we pave farmland, what we're doing is we're taking that water that was going to go to the Great Salt Lake and we're hardening it in the system, and we're keeping it from doing it because it's going to municipal. It's really disappointing that this concern for the Great Salt Lake has translated into antipathy for farming. Okay, so I need to disclose a personal conflict of interest, and this is a photo of my horse. He lives at my house, in my backyard in Sandy, okay? And so my wife and I have been buying between 5 and 10 tons of alfalfa hay every single year for the last, I don't even know, 25 years, okay? So I'm supportive of water conservation, and I want to see farmlands exist in the future because, you know, they're not making more farmland. They're not making new prime farmland. No one's out there making new soil, right? So when we lose farms, we lose the ability to feed ourselves. And it's not just the land that we lose the culture of farming that knows how to farm. And it's crazy. I interviewed a farmer once for a show I was involved in, and he said, look, if we're not careful, we're going to be fighting wars over food. Because if we are dependent on imports for what we eat, it is not sustainable. So this idea that the solution to delivering water to the lake is hating farming or stopping farming is foolish. That's ridiculous. That's not the future. The future is finding ways to deliver water to the Great Salt Lake. But we are not fiscally conservative. We pretend like we are, okay? Travis mentioned our water use in the municipal sector, not farming, the municipal sector in our cities. And our water use per person is about 240 gallons per person per day. Every man, woman, and child in Utah, in the cities, okay, using that much water. And that's an average, 365 days a year, right? And remember that 75% of the water we use in our cities is in the summer outside on our landscapes. So that means people are using, at a household, 100,000 gallons of water in a month. That's incredible, right? National average is closer to 138 gallons per person per day, okay? Why do we use so much water? We're not bad people. There's nothing wrong with Utahns. Market economics. We have the least expensive municipal water in the United States. The cheapest water. And you say, first you say, Zach, come on, what are you trying to do? Make water more expensive for everybody? No. We're paying property taxes on our housing. We're paying property taxes on our cars. We're paying property taxes on the value of our businesses that go to local water suppliers to lower the price of water. Everything you buy that has a sales tax on it, from a stick of gum to an automobile, has 1/8 of a cent going to water to lower the price of water, okay? So we're paying these massive property taxes. We did a study, this was amazing. I had this researcher who you could just set in a room with no windows and he would just love his research. And so for a year, he read through 338 audited financial statements of urban water suppliers across the United States, across the American West, 13 Western states. And he found that water suppliers outside of supposedly fiscally conservative Utah collect property taxes at about 1/4 the rate that Utah water suppliers do. In other words, we're collecting 4 times the property tax level to lower the price of water, to incentivize people to waste water. It makes no sense. We're watering sidewalks and gutters and driveways. For what purpose? Are we washing them? I mean, I rode along in Las Vegas once with the water cops. I sat in the front seat and I watched these guys, and they would just drive down the street in their trucks working for the Las Vegas Water District. And they would see like this little ribbon of water in the gutter, and oh, look, let's go, here we go. And they get all excited. They go down this street and that street, and they follow it up to where it came out. They knock on the door, and they really polite, ma'am, you know, you're watering, it's not your day. You're not supposed to be watering on this day. And I've followed this stream in the gutter, which is waste. That's just, there's no point in doing that whatsoever. And I've watched it, and so I'm going to give you a warning. But if I do it again, you know, if someone comes back, it's going to be a $100 fine. It is really hard to drive down a street in the Wasatch Front cities and not find that. I mean, maybe you go a block. We will not save water if we are incentivizing people to waste it. And so Governor Leavitt, back in 1995, did a summit, Water Transportation Open Summit, in open space. And he coined this phrase around water, make the users pay. Meaning, get rid of this property tax so that people pay the full cost of their water in their bill, basic free market economics, which we as fiscally conservative Utahns embrace. And Governor Olene Walker said the same thing. Governor Huntsman said the same thing, get rid of the property tax. Every single governor in Utah since Mike Leavitt has said we need to get rid of these property taxes, and users need to have the choice to pay the full cost of their water in their bill. Basic free market economics, just like we do with our gasoline in our cars, just like we do with our electricity and our natural gas. We don't collect a property tax to lower the price of those commodities, and yet with water we do. I have written 5 different bills and found 5 different legislators, every single one of them are Republican, to run a phase-out bill to just reduce the property tax 25%, just 25%, for heaven's sakes, so that they can only collect 25% of their revenues from taxes. I can't get it out of committee. 1998, we got it to the Senate floor. That was it. We refuse to embrace fiscal conservatism in Utah around water. And what's shameful is that we're criticizing farmers and saying, well, I'm not going to save water until they save water. But in our cities, we won't even lift a little pinky to save water. Thank you.
So that's really curious, because about 5 years ago when Layton City said, don't water your lawns, I didn't water my lawn, and then my water bill doubled. So that's part of the information and not all of it then. And I think that we need to get to all of it. And so Chelsea's going to kind of take a few minutes, and then we'll move into the Q&A portion.
Hi guys, I'm Chelsea Hope. I don't have a ton prepared to say. Jen just kind of invited me to come hang out with the panel. For those of you that don't know me, I'm from Utah County. In 2022, I started noticing some kind of really weird things going on with the drought narrative in the state, and just involved in grassroots movements, just kind of started looking into it. I noticed that Deer Creek, they had been draining the lake for 2 weeks. And right after that, they had come out with a piece in the paper that, oh my gosh, because of climate change, the lake is at 42% capacity. And I'm sitting there, I go to the lake all the time, and you guys were just draining it. So I had reached out to try to figure out kind of where the water was going, because there were some interesting, I don't remember who was mentioning the lake and the dust, but you know, Lake Bonneville has been drying up for a really long time. And there hasn't been a major dust arsenic problem with Lake Bonneville the whole time those flats have been drying out. And you know, as the water dries, the salt crystallizes and hardens. And so this narrative with kind of like the arsenic, all of a sudden this tiny little spot in the Great Salt Lake, there's this huge arsenic threat, you know? So we actually went out with a hydrologist and we tested the water and soil, and it came back negative for arsenic. And the University of Utah ended up doing another independent study, and it came back negative for arsenic. So I just started noticing there were some kind of just weird things going on with the narrative, and I wanted to try to figure out where the water at Deer Creek was going, because I was noticing that as one lake shrunk, somewhere else the level was coming up, and it just kind of, the drought kind of almost seemed like an illusion, right? And looking into the Utah Central Project, we end up finding out that a lot of the water with the Colorado system goes to Mexico, and there was a pilot program that let a bunch of that water out to the ocean, testing ecosystems. California, I don't know if you saw in the national news, but Newsom, like, they've been letting a lot of the fresh water out to the ocean as well. And then looking into the Great Salt Lake, there are a lot of companies on the lake that mine tens to hundreds of billions of gallons of water per year. They evaporate it from the lake for mineral mining. And a lot of those companies are owned by British Columbia, Canada, and they trade with China. So they mine for lithium and minerals, and then they give those to China. So kind of noticing where the water's going. I was out with I think Jen mentioned the boat ride out of the Great Salt Lake, and I was with Ron there the other week, and they were saying that, you know, I had asked them, we're hearing that the water that's supposedly being conserved is being sent, you know, to the Great Salt Lake to help with the bird habitat, to help with the health of the lake. is that really where it's going? And they said, absolutely. They've been out there for years. I don't know how much you talked about what they do out there, but they've been out there for years. And that the water isn't actually going to the places that they say it's going to businesses on the lake. And Ron is great. He's you're better than I am. He's not gonna name names, but Tim Hawks, who was a legislator, is part of the Brine Shrimp Harvesting Company up there. You've got, who else was it? What was that? Yeah, Snyder. You've got all these companies out, Trout Unlimited, on the lake that also benefit from water getting out there. The Brine Shrimp, Great Salt Lake Brine Shrimp Harvesting Company, it's a multi-million-dollar industry. And you had Tim Hawks, who was a legislator, appropriating water and funds to get more water out there. And then again, conflict of interest, they're making money off of this, right? So I've been following water policy up at the legislature since 2022. There's a lot of concerns that I have. I got mixed, the state park said that water was being sent to the Great Salt Lake. I had 2 legislators give me different reasons for why that water was sent out there. And that same year, I had done a grandma request to try to figure out where the water had gone. Our state Division of Water Rights had no idea, no records exist. Okay, so then I asked state parks, no records exist. I asked the Provo Water Users Association, no records exist. No one in the state seems to know where that water went. But I did get a letter back from the Provo Water User Association saying that they had sent a letter to all of their water shareholders that they were only going to receive 90% of their water shares for the year because of drought. However, it was the same year that Cox announced that proclamation that surplus water from all of the units would be sent to the lake. So my question, I had met with some legislators, I'd met with the director of water resources, and I'm asking, if people are getting their water shares cut, how do we supposedly have surplus water to send to the lake? And we've been, these like a few others have said, we have all these housing developments coming in. Cox is bringing in Texas Instruments and German companies that are headquartered in Texas, and we're moving all their headquarters here. And economic growth, right? He wants to bring people here. Economic growth. Well, those 2 narratives can't exist, right? We're either in a dire drought and we don't have the resource to share, or we're going to push economic growth and bring population growth here, and we have the water, right? But those narratives, and that's another thing, is government has forgotten its proper role. But there's a lot of other concerns that I've been seeing. Conflicts of interest on the lake, the $40 billion that Brad Wilson, when he was Speaker of House, gave to create a trust to run the lake. And the nonprofit organizations, the NGOs that we're seeing all the corruption on the federal level, right, that have partnered with our state agencies to run the lake. There's a lot of corruption going on there. There's a lot of really scary things going on there. And the people that they've partnered with, the initiatives that they're bringing in. One of the things that Biden rolled out in his administration was his Executive Order 14008. And that was essentially for environmental justice. So you've heard of social justice, racial justice, reparations, DEI, right? And it's to essentially bring in all of that with the environment, give equal rights to nature as humans, and equitably redistribute all resources, including natural resources, water, land. So they want to do away with traditional water rights. And this is part of the issue with, what you're using your water for. In this state, the water belongs to the people. They like to try to say that it belongs to government, it belongs to the state. It belongs to the people, and that was made very clear in our Utah Constitution when we became a state. And we believe in prior appropriation, right? First in time, first in right. And whoever settled this area first, especially agriculture, farmers, that water, senior water rights, is supposed to go to them. However, over the years, we've kind of been doing away with that. And veering more towards, well, the farmers need to conserve, we're going to cut water rights to kind of redistribute where we see fit. And then you end up finding out that, these housing developments, well, a lot of legislators also have major conflicts of interest because they're real estate developers, right? You start to notice that these public-private partnerships that they legislate, then they also sit on the boards of a lot of these organizations that end up getting these water rights. The state's gone and bought up water rights. And I agree with, was it Ron or Doug, where is the water going, right? Because if we're conserving so much water, we're having water cuts all over the place to get to the lake, why does it just keep shrinking, 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 right? And if you watch the satellite, the lake has done this for a while, right? We go through natural phases of drought, grows, lowers, grows, lowers. They're evaporating water up there. They're harvesting for brine shrimp. So if the lake is all of a sudden really, really shrinking right now, and we've been doing so much conserving, and we have the water for population growth, like where is that water actually going? So I would like Tina, our auditor, at some point to do an audit of where are the water rights actually being rerouted to? Because I don't necessarily trust that it's getting to the lake for good reasons. I think it's going to developers and the people on the trust that run that lake. It's people like Timothy Hawks, right? So they legislate, they step down from the legislature and either step onto executive branch boards like Joel Ferry or onto these trusts and public-private partnerships to now execute the laws that they created in the legislature. And there's so much conflict of interest and corruption, it's not even funny. So yeah, I will stop there. My brain could go a million different ways, but if you want me to expand on any of that during questions, then we can do that.
Okay, let's go ahead and get our panelists to come up. I've got tons of questions, tons and tons. So while they're going up there, I did want to talk about Stratus for a minute, because what the information that we've heard is it's 42,000 square miles. From someone else that I spoke with, acres, sorry. Yeah, that seems a little big. Okay, 42,000 acres. So I was speaking with a biologist, and she felt like that's the amount of land that they had to purchase to get the water rights to get water for the data center. Does that sound feasible to you? Would you agree with that on a? So I was talking to a biological scientist, and she said she felt like the purchase of the 42,000 acres was because that's how many acres they needed to purchase for the water rights, that the center was never going to be 42,000 acres in size, but that's how many acres they had to purchase for the water rights. Does that sound feasible?
I do know, in speaking with House Majority, that the 40,000 acres of land that was bought, the original intention was never to have a 40,000 acre data center. Part of that land was supposed to house the data center, according to House Majority. And half the time I trust them and half the time I don't. So, but then they're also supposed to be, I know we do have some good legislators in House that want to bring back industrial business like, steel and bring those kinds of skills back. So I don't know what all they were planning on, but I do know that there were other things they were planning to use that land for. So I really question this whole, Adams telling him to shrink the land down to by 75%. I mean, 10,000 acres was about the area that they were going to use on that land for the data center anyway. So I don't think really any difference was made. I just think it was a manipulative narrative in the news. So I don't know 100% what that water would be going to, right? If it's the data center and industrial development, I don't know. I do know that it was brackish salt water, I think, that was being used for alfalfa crops and grazing, so goodbye farming.
Yeah, would you agree with that?
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you. I think, so we did an analysis of the data center's water use, and we couldn't pin it down because the data center producers were not transparent, and neither was MIDA. I know you guys are shocked to hear that, right? About the total water use. And so we were like, well, it could be anywhere from 4,000 to 20,000 acre feet. I've heard estimates as high as 50,000 acre feet, so we really don't know. And we also don't know what else was part of the development. We only know that the Stratus Data Center was sort of like the first part of that industrial center. There are many legislators that feel like the north arm of the Great Salt Lake, so the north arm is that part that's north of the railroad causeway, and the north arm is, the Great Salt Lake is kind of like a hand. if you will. Here's my thumb is the Bear River coming in, okay? And this is sort of the north arm, but it's not proportional. 40% of it is north of that railroad causeway, and all of that water that goes into the north arm comes entirely from one hole in that railroad causeway. And some of the legislators, there was a bill last August that was run to allow the state to dry it up. And Senator Sandal said the north arm is where we put excess water. And so it's been quite clear, all of the conversation's been about the south arm of the Great Salt Lake, okay? And that's when people talk about the lake and they talk about the lake elevation, they only give you one elevation. It's because they're only thinking about the south arm, where all the visitor facilities are and the campgrounds. The north arm is where the data center is. And so the plan is to dry up the north arm. Some people's plan is to dry up the north arm and then put a lot of industrial development back there. I was in the State House and Senator Adams was overheard saying to a tour,
Close to former Senator Adams.
Close to former Senator Adams said, we should just dry up that north arm. And so that's why I say, you know, we got to be really careful about claims that the legislators want to save the Great Salt Lake, because you got to claim that to get elected. It doesn't mean you have to vote that way once you get elected.
Okay. So Chelsea talked about, this is a really loud mic. Chelsea talked about the $40 million that Representative Wilson appropriated to save the Great Salt Lake, right? So as farmers, did you see, like, because from what I was told, that was to purchase water rights from farmers that weren't using it. So that doesn't make sense to me. Do you have any insight on that? We can play music with mics.
Tina, can you come turn all our mics on? We don't know how to do it.
Now it works now. You just have to hit it right. I got to learn technology, I guess. Yeah, 4 years ago when they talked about purchasing unused water rights from farmers, there was various methods to do that. Professors at a couple of colleges and some other people who were supposed to be smart and good experts. My interpretation of what they were saying, how to get it, was one, that's kind of fair, but the other one is we're going to force farmers to sell it to us, and they'll take the water. Some of that occurred because they got rid of farms, and then they took the water. There's one farmer I know, Big Dairy. They eventually had to sell their ground, and the purchaser of that ground took their water rights that they took out of the Weber River directly, and that was a big chunk of water. So what are they going to use that water for? It's not for farming. So where does that water go is all my question. So somebody is out to get the water, and with Chelsea, I agree there's a control issue here with the legislator and other organizations who want to control the water. So if they get the water rights that we farmers had and the pioneers had 180 years ago, they filed on that water. They got water rights. These water rights over 100 years old. They should determine, them or their descendants should determine what happens to that water. But there's organizations, states who are out to get that water one way or another. And I'm very leery of anybody saying, we'll buy your water right. If I'm using my water right, maybe not now, maybe not next year, but I will the third year, I'm going to keep it. And it's a valuable asset for a farm.
Yeah, thank you. So I think this last legislative session, they appropriated another $1 billion. Is that right? Adams, in one of the meet and greets, Adams was like, we just allocated another $1 billion for the Great Salt Lake. But then they're putting Josh Romney over saving the Great Salt Lake, and he's raising another couple $100 million for saving the Great Salt Lake. But my question for you two from the South Davis district, did you see any benefit from the $40 million that was spent? And do you think you'll see any benefit from the $1 billion that they're going to put towards the lake?
That we paid for.
No, we haven't seen anything. One thing we need to understand, though, is a lot of these water rights they're talking about are not actual water. Their water rights are very over-appropriated. Sorry, my throat. The water rights are over-appropriated. In other words, there's more paper than there is water everywhere. For example, in the Jordan River, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints gave the state an unbelievable amount of water. That wasn't, or water rights, that wasn't actual water that was ever used. That's just water, that's paper. They're giving over paper to the state so it can never be used in the future. So a lot of this water that we're talking about and these water rights are not actual water. It's just the right to use that water. For example, our irrigation contracts with Weber Basin, we don't actually own that water. That water comes from the Bureau of Reclamation, essentially, and it's not actual water rights that we hold. But some entities, so as people are saving water and conserving, municipalities, they are selling back to Weber Basin the contract ability to use that water. It's not actual water that's ever been used. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I'd love to just speak to a couple things. So first of all, the claim that the legislature spent $1 billion on the lake is not actually true.
I believe you.
They've spent about $250 million specifically on the lake. Most of that is for research. So they claim that, but it's not true. There's hundreds of millions of dollars on various water spending that just is agencies that have been, and that's fine, but that's not for the Great Salt Lake, even though that's what we've been heard. The $40 million is actually to lease water, which speaks to what Doug was saying too. It's not actually going to permanently buy wet water to go to the lake. To buy wet water to go to the lake, first two things need to happen, right? What's the difference between buying a home and renting a home? It's the same here with water. So if you pay someone to lease their water short term, there are many that are wondering if it's a way to tie up water rights for proposed Bear River development and harden the system into municipal use more, which is why I think the North Arm, drying up the North Arm means we reduce the lake by 40%. That's less water we have to actually share with it. And so what our concern with this short-term leasing and this $40 million is that, like, we've heard bold claims from some, even conservation groups, that, oh, we've already saved 300,000 acre feet that's going to the lake. And we went through the depletion rates. We could only identify 67,000 acre feet of water that's actually going to the lake, that's wet water, which is a pittance. If we're gonna go back to 4198 elevation, which is what you see on a highway map for the Great Salt Lake, then we need 800,000 acre feet of additional water every single year, wet water, not paper rights, for 20 years. There's no way we're doing that by the Olympics. It's a fantasy. And so I think what's happening is we have to decide if we're gonna live with the lake or not, because we should just be honest with ourselves about what we want and not really be bamboozled by people that water's complicated. It's like anything. It's like energy. It's so complicated. Your piece about water conservation, that's market economics, right? Because if you stop using water, the water supplier has to raise the price because the water is technically free, but not their staff and not their infrastructure. These guys have to figure out, if people use less water, how do I still maintain all of my staff and infrastructure? It's a scary thing.
Yeah. Speaking of other legislation, so in 2016, there was a Senate joint resolution commemorating our 10-year commitment with our sister city in China, which is Liaoning, China. And they talked in that Senate joint resolution, and it talked about how we had partnered on education. So the 10 years, that would have been 2006. That's when the China, I know you're like scratching your head. Where is she going with this? I'm getting to a good spot, I promise. So it included dual immersion in Chinese dual immersion schools. It included trade, and Senator Adams said by that by that 10-year point that China had invested $50 million into Utah. And I am just curious where that went. He also said that we partnered on culture and legislation. So in my opinion, asking anybody who had secondary water to put a made in China secondary water meter on their property was, like, to me that just sounded Chinese. I don't know, because we control every drop, right? I don't know. So I think, first of all, we need some transparency on what legislation actually came from the CCP appointed council members that are our legislators' great friends. But I wonder if any of you have seen any benefits from forced secondary water meters in any of your areas of expertise. Was there any benefit to that?
I haven't seen any benefit in wet water in the secondary metering at all.
Turn it off. Anyway, before they did the water metering, we'd found that we can send a postcard out to every one of our users. Cost us around $500 maybe to mail it. We mail it out at the beginning of the water season and ask people, you're going to have to conserve this year, you're going to have to reduce water usage. And you know what? They do it. And if we see, we can track how much water we're using, and Jake, you can add on to this. But if we see that they're using more coming up in the hot months, we might send out another postcard in the hot months and say, hey, remember, we need to cut back a little bit and stuff. And you can just see the actual work on it. So spending it for us, it was about $3,000 a meter to install. We could send out postcard for the next 100 years for the cost of installing meters. And then, like I say, when I said, if somebody can tell me where the savings is going, then I might be more excited about saving water, but nobody can tell me what's happening to the water that we save, other than I could guess who's benefiting from it, but there's nobody will tell you.
Yeah. Chelsea, do you want to talk about One Water, the UN there?
One Water is a little complex. Yeah, that brings in state and federal law integration, basically. They're manipulating our language. I think we saw that with DEI. They're doing it with resilience of water. I don't know if you're aware of that, but and the whole Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan for water into the lake for the Olympics essentially is to let these NGOs come in and make the Great Salt Lake the main priority of the state, and all of our other drinking water, farming water, right, all the other water is going to take, basically the Great Salt Lake is first priority, and all of us come next, and this is where this equitable redistribution of resources comes in. For those that don't think that we have communist ideology coming into our state, you would be very, very wrong. And I have so much documented proof of it, it's not even funny. I'm happy to share it with you, to email to them if you'd like, but essentially it's, water reuse, integration of water meters, water infrastructure, and data on the Internet of Water. And this would take an hour to explain all of One Water, but yeah, there is a concern with China being involved with smart meters. They do have a partnership with Rocky Mountain Power for the energy meters, and this already happened in Colorado. It's already happened where the energy meters got shut off. I don't know if you guys remember seeing that story in the news, but it was in the middle of the summer, and because energy was too high, government thought it was okay to just lock and shut everybody off to their energy meters. They didn't have any electricity or cooling through the summer. Well, they have the capability, right, with advanced metering infrastructure, which is two-way communication and control of smart meters to shut you off to water whenever they want. I've been advocating it. Look, if we want to measure water, I get it, but we've used analog for so long. And with the smart infrastructure, it gets really scary. You know, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and I don't know how much you guys know about these groups, but it's really scary, some of the things they're pushing, you know, the transgender and DEI ideology and all of these things that have just are destroying our culture and our country right now comes from these groups. And they essentially would get, through the EPA and federal partnerships, and their NGOs would get control over these smart meters. So equitable redistribution, including, you know, colored people, LGBTQ, vulnerable populations, they're going to start deciding who gets water and who doesn't based off of climate adaptation policy. So anybody who's hurting the planet, like farmers because of climate change and cow farts, or water for processing coal or fossil fuels, right? Water's going to go away to all of those people, and now all of a sudden they can turn on and shut off water with these meters whenever they want. So yeah, and then the China, we do have proof that China, I know for sure they have a partnership with Rocky Mountain Power. So like the meters that we're using were made in China. And here's the other thing with smart, you know, analog versus smart meters and infrastructure is we own the hardware, but we don't own the software, right? So like computers, they're constantly doing updates for it to work. China's gonna be doing the one that does all these software updates and has access, right? So, yeah, if that's where you're trying to go with China. Yeah, One Water is very, very complicated, and I am planning on doing kind of a video series to show the documentation and proof of all of it on YouTube, so I can send you those to send out if you'd like, but.
Perfect. Well, Stephanie ran on transparency, so we're going to hit her up for some, having, maybe when those bills come up, having sourced, okay, if this is coming from a foreign country, that needs to be disclosed. If you're meeting with a foreign country, that needs to be disclosed. If Qatar, for your family, oh, was that my phone? If your family of 11 went to Qatar for the World Cup, that probably should be disclosed, like all those kinds of things. So, Zachary, you mentioned earlier about maybe we stop subsidizing the use of water so that we use less water. However, what will that do to farmers, and what will be the impact on our food and all of that?
Great question. So again, remember the property tax we're talking about is the property tax for municipal water. We're talking about cities. And our organization, when we've run our bill, we've only made the property tax lowering to 25% of the revenue in urban areas, and we've left rural areas alone. Rural areas, it's much harder to pay for water infrastructure because you have many less people, right? It's the definition of rural. And so a property tax collection on property to pay for water infrastructure in farming communities and rural communities makes a lot more sense. But once you start having 1 million water users in a city, there's no reason why you can't pay for their water supply with rate revenue instead of property taxes, and that's what we see in urban areas across the West. So if we shift away from the property taxes in these highly urbanized areas, then what it would do is it would raise the price of municipal water in these urbanized areas without impacting farmers. One of the reasons why we think this is really important is because what we effectively see is we see that the cities are coming after the rural agricultural water supply. And the farmers, I mean, I've talked to farmers who say that every week someone from Wall Street calls them to buy their water. And so there is a monetization happening in water, and agricultural water is cheap, and so if you have a lot of capital, you can go after it and buy it, and farmers are land rich and cash poor. And so it's very hard to defend rural water supplies from cities, and that's what we see happening. So we're like, look, you gotta raise the price of water in cities. Yes, you're gonna conserve water, because, right, that's what happens when we go to the grocery store and price of food goes up, maybe I won't buy that, right? Water's the same way. And that makes these guys' job that sell water for a living, that makes it harder. But the idea is that the cities need to be more efficient with their water use before they come after farm water. And
Okay.
that's our position.
Well, so let me get through this point and then we'll go to the, there's a few more questions I have. So, property taxes specifically with the incremental financing, how familiar are you with the incremental financing that's going on with the developers? So there's a ton of these stack and packs or compartments or whatever you want to call. It's high density housing is about, I guess, is defined as at least 6 housing units per acre. So that's not necessarily high density, but 250 per 5 acres, that's a crap ton. So I'm just going to say crap ton because I'm not running for office anymore. So if people move into the apartments and they're already paying like the stuff the infrastructure that went to build that, and they've overbuilt, we know that they've overbuilt that because there's new complexes. There's one by me that has about 250 units, and it's taken over a year to get 30 cars in the parking lot. Some of them downtown Salt Lake aren't even hitting 10% occupancy, and they're not being counted in the overall occupancy levels until they hit 85%. So that's just their little caveat right there. The problem is the property taxes are just going to keep going up and up and up and up, especially with every infrastructure district that gets added to the property tax, and the property tax that went into a public infrastructure district isn't going to pay the regular taxes. It's not going to schools. It's not going to other places. It's going back into the funds that they borrowed and took from the next 30 years up to 45 years of tax revenue from that piece of property. So I think when our legislature tells us, hey, we're a year out from being debt-free, well, they are, but the taxpayers aren't. We're in it for another 45 years, and MIDA just wrote themselves a law that says that MIDA can't go away as long as there's an active infrastructure district. So there's a lot of concerns for me, like there's these huge puzzle pieces that I don't think a lot of our legislators even understand, and how much they have harmed Utah by taking revenue from the next 20 to 45 years for something they want now. So I agree with you when you say we are not fiscally responsible or conservative when our legislators have gambled away our futures like that. So Ron, did you have a comment, or Chelsea?
Oh, really quick, Ron, just 60 seconds. So Casey Snyder, right, is one of these legislators who he essentially pushed for smart meters and to hold our neighbors accountable for how much water they're using, which is part of the One Water and Internet of Water and data from the smart meters, right, to track how much water you're using. And one of the problems with the water usage is he has also created policy where now he's created, right, tiered rates. We have tiered rates now for paying for water, which is absolutely ridiculous. It is a myth that we pay for our water supply. It's a myth. We pay for the transportation and the cleaning, right, the service of water. Water is an inalienable right from God. It's rain. Nobody gets to patent that, right? So who gets to just all of a sudden, you're using water, you have to pay me, right? But Casey has been pushing for those types of policies, and I asked him, who gets to profit from that? Again, partnerships with legislators, with water supply companies, right? So they are, one of the things that he added this last session on these tiered rates is water conservation has to be a priority. So these meters now, we're gonna track your water usage, and government now gets to decide how much water is considered conservation and hike your prices for how much you're using, regardless of what your water right amount is, right, that you were previously awarded. So they're gonna start hiking up prices, which is creating what they're trying to come down the line with, this water affordability issue. And essentially the EPA creates kind of like a food stamp water on welfare system is part of the One Water. So, but Casey, just so you guys are aware, also is the one who wrote into policy how to get an exemption on water meters, and then he got himself an exemption. When I talked to him on the phone, I just wanted to verify that he had actually done that, and he said that he had. you know, he told me, I don't have a problem with metering. And I'm like, well, obviously you do, you know, because why would you write an exemption for yourself and then get that exemption? And basically the only area that qualifies for that exemption is his area. So just a note on, you know, pricing and where money is going with water. This is coming down the line and it's going to keep getting worse.
Okay, Ron?
Sorry, Ron.
I just keep coming back. We got to look at this thing in its entirety. It's so complicated. It's so hard to get it. And everybody has their piece of the puzzle, and everybody is up there trying to get that in their bill. But if I do A, it might impact B, which impacts C, and we never look at this together. And I know it's extremely complicated, and I don't know how we do this, but when we have, a lot of times it's not the people that are up there talking to them. It's not even the small water districts that are up there getting any input in there. It's all the big players with the money and skin in the game, and their interest is not for the people in a lot of cases, and that's what I'm concerned about. And I don't know how we do that, how we get them to start paying attention to what's good for all of us rather than what's good for the few.
Amen.
I think we vote them out. That's where we start.
We can get rid of SB 54, but that's another topic for
Yeah,
another day.
yeah. So I want each of you to take a couple of minutes because we're almost out of time. But I want you to talk about what is not in the media that should be. What is not in the mainstream media from your point of view that every Utahn needs to know?
Okay, I talked from the agricultural side. There's a lot of agricultural information that is not in the media. They've used misinformation, partial information, things to influence citizens and voters. In my opinion, people who've been here less than 10 years, especially, you know, there's a lot of them, that they can convince them that as farmers we abuse our water rights, we waste water, and all these other things. And like I said, they don't tell the whole story of water. There was I think it was KSL radio report had Mike Schultz on one time, and they asked him the question about water use and does alfalfa really use all that much water? And he kind of gave an answer that said no, but it wasn't emphatic enough to say no, that's a myth. And I can tell you alfalfa has deep taproot, so it goes deep water, and so it can last a while. And I water alfalfa every 2 to 3 weeks. I water grain and grass every week. It has shallow root system, so it needs it or it dries up. And just like your garden, if you don't water it, it'll dry out and you lose production. So in the sense of production, that's information that doesn't get out. And there's a lot of agriculture information that doesn't get out. And the one especially is if we lose farms and we lose farmers and all these productive farms, where does the food come from? And you mentioned other countries. Well, it already comes in. We're importing a lot more food than we used to. Our trade deficit in food has, once in a while, it's in our favor, but a lot of times we're bringing more food in. And example, orange juice. Where does the orange juice come from? Some from Florida, but others from other countries, where other foods are coming from other countries. You know, if we lose our farmers, we lose our food and fiber production, then we have to buy it from somewhere else. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. That's not reliability, it's not sustainability, and yet in my opinion, our government officials, the state and even national, but even at the county levels, are less interested in supporting farmers. And if you go out of business, you know, someday I'm going to get old enough I want to retire from farming. Well, who's going to take over my farm? City, communities, everybody else. So there's where the farm goes, is nobody's wants to farm because there's other ways. It's easier just to go to the store and get food. Why would you want to work for it? So that's the big thing is farmers are, and food production should be prioritized and should be exemplified as a good thing to have in your neighborhood. And I think as Zach said, talk about farmers. We need farmers. And I mentioned we recycle water. We do a lot of things. We raise food and fiber one way or another. Corn and alfalfa, you don't eat that field corn. You don't eat the alfalfa or you don't eat the grass. But it goes into cows for milk or beef for meat. And you do go to restaurants and have meat, and a lot of it's beef or lamb. It all goes the same way. So it produces food for people. And that's what the story ought to be, is we ought to cherish farmers and thank them for raising food for people.
Thank you.
One thing that has been really amazing to me is the lack of discussion on our groundwater and the interplay of our groundwater, the aquifer, and the Great Salt Lake, and the danger that poses. People don't realize how dangerous that is and how the Great Salt Lake can push back and mix into our fresh water that we all rely on. People have forgotten that back in the 50s and 60s, the Bureau of Reclamation came in and built all the reservoirs that we use. They think of them as just recreational spots, but back in the 50s, those were built, and they store our snow melt so that we can use it during the summer, so it doesn't just flow into the Great Salt Lake where it's just evaporated. And it's been amazing, and I go to the Capitol and I've talked to the Casey Snyders and everything, and they just blow it off. But the state engineer knows. She knows what's happening. And I've talked to her numerous times, but it's all political. It's all political and things being pushed by certain people in the legislature. And I'm afraid that we're going to get to the point where we're not going to be able to fix the problem because we don't have enough water coming from Weber Basin culinary side to supply everyone if our wells go bad, if they become contaminated from the Great Salt Lake. And so that's the one thing that just, it blows my mind that hasn't been discussed. The state hasn't studied it before they push the secondary mandate. And we're not saying that secondary metering or that watering with sprinklers and recharging the aquifer is efficient. It's not. Although water that goes down the gutter does end up in the Great Salt Lake, by the way. That is where it goes. But something needs to be done to get the state to look more at the groundwater situation. They know it. They know the situation. The USGS monitors it. They have all that data. Studies have been done, multiple studies by the feds, by the USGS. We get roughly 40% of our recharge from culinary. Again, that's, well, no, it's a mixture of culinary and secondary. So culinary we get from Weber Basin to supplement our wells, and that is water we don't have to pump out of the ground. And secondary we put on our grass. They used to flood irrigate back in the day. They don't anymore, and we have seen the aquifer drop substantially since 2000 when they started the no watering between 10 and 6 rule was 2000, and you can see a substantial drop. That's when the aquifer really took a hit. And we're not saying it's not the drought. Of course, the drought is a huge part of it. But mandates like secondary metering without any sort of study or analysis is dangerous. And more of that as the legislature panics and we have all these hidden agendas from legislators like Hawks, we're in a lot of trouble with our drinking water, and people don't realize that, and that's scary. So that's the one thing I want to put out there.
Thank you. Ron?
So the question was, what would I like to see in the media? And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but maybe one of these investigative journalists could take and try to find out where some of the water that's been saved is going. go out there and interview the legislators, interview the water companies, and see if they can track where an acre foot of water is going, because it's pretty hard. It's hard to put a tag. You can tag geese, but it's pretty hard to tag water. But if they're going to keep saying we're saving this and it's going there, then show us. So I'd like to see them do that. I totally agree with Jake. The aquifer, I'd like to see some studies, some investigative journalism on what's happening to the aquifers. And also another thing, just even when we keep saying, you know, we'll increase the water rates and we'll put in tiers and that kind of thing, I think a lot of times what you see is, yeah, if you're a low-income person, you will cut back. But if you have high income, doesn't matter what the rate is. If you want to water your lawn, you will keep watering your lawn. So it's almost discriminatory in a sense that you're going to put the poorest person in a bind, and the richest person doesn't care what's happening. So the tiered rates, even something could be looked at.
Chelsea, do you want to talk about what you think should be in the mainstream media?
Yeah, so one of the things, okay, so I'm sorry, I'm going to push back a little bit just with the lawns and stuff. So, because we have grow the flow, but then we have slow the flow, right? Slow the flow for us to grow the flow to the lake, but then we're all questioning, even though you represent grow the flow, is the water, oh, you don't? Oh, you're Utah River water, okay, sorry. So that was...
Travis, he left.
He left. Okay, sorry, I mixed you two up. So here's part of the problem is with all of this waterways, you know, landscaping is, you see this in Arizona, right? They have police, like water police that come by. And if they think you're wasting water, they can fine you. But again, just like government deciding how much is conservation and who gets to profit off water and, you know, how you use your water right, we either believe in prior appropriation water rights or we don't. And one of the things that concerns me is with all of this landscaping, you know, you putting the rocks in, first of all, it does spike energy bills. It creates heat issues, and the ground recharges that water. And the more grass and soil that we have, because a lot of these programs is take out non-agricultural turf and soil, right? Well, farmers they're talking about right now with the new Colorado River Compact negotiations, which you probably know, Doug, they want to pay farmers not to plant crops to save water. So we're going to create a famine. So what happens when you remove that agricultural turf and soil and now you can't plant food or gardens in your yard, which they're also going to start pushing for with these tiered rates. Now you're going to have to, well, you know, this is for food, this is for agriculture. Okay, well, lower your rate, but register your garden with the government. This reminds me of Stalin. And I'll be the conspiracy theorist. I don't have a problem with that. It reminds me of Stalin, right? We have so much centralization. They've taken the power away from local water commissioners. They're centralizing under the state engineer, which Cox appoints. And a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the issues we've talked about today is being centralized under just a small handful of very corrupt people. But that water that goes down into the ground also you know, you have evaporation processes that happen, and we have natural evaporation processes throughout the state. Yeah, they've rewritten science everywhere that causes that rain to come back down throughout the state. But as we're getting rid of that and putting in rocks and you mess with that, we're not going to have as much rain in those areas anymore, right? And then the cloud seeding that they're doing. I think it was in '83 when we had all of that flooding and they pumped water from the Great Salt Lake into the West Desert. It was after intense cloud seeding, and we had so much flooding, but the surrounding states it was like a dry record for the surrounding states that year, because you're essentially taking water out of the clouds before it can move to where it's naturally supposed to fall. So we're messing with natural evaporation processes, which is going to cause drought-like conditions as well. So just keep that in mind with the xeriscaping. And when farmers, farmers have been warning about this for a while. We have very corrupt federal agencies that have been coming for farms. They're using eminent domain on farms now. We have, I don't know if you guys know this, but Bill Gates is doing a geothermal energy project in the state. They just, this last session, wrote policy to include geothermal fluids under water rights. So water rights, I believe, are now going to Bill Gates to do a geothermal energy project in the state. Geothermal energy, just so you guys are aware, they push liquid, water or liquid, down into where fracture lines are, fault lines, and it causes tectonic shifts to essentially boil the water, push it up, and create this massive amount of energy. It causes earthquakes. And we live on fault lines here, so that that massive earthquake that happened off the coast of Russia like a year ago or something, and it caused all those tsunamis like in Japan. If you go look at that area where that earthquake happened, there's 4 geothermal projects set up right in that area. So it's extremely dangerous. Bill Gates, just so you're aware, Envision Utah is one of the groups that for decades has been going to local cities and state legislation, kind of, we represent the people, this is what we want. A lot of this stuff they are bringing in, but they implemented into the state the PACE and Law program for housing development, cities, and future water planning. And the PACE and Law research for water planning long-term was funded by and written by Bill Gates. So in Utah, that's happened. I have that document as well. So again, we're sending water. One more thing really quick, Jen. I don't know if you guys know this, but the 0 fatalities, right? Oh, the only acceptable solution for on the road as far as accidents is no accidents, no fatalities, right? They have in the Utah Department of Transportation documents from 2016 basically saying the only way to achieve that goal is to remove human error completely, which means remove human autonomy from driving vehicles. So they passed a bill called Aspire to electrify our entire system in Utah. Homes, roadways, they're literally building out roads that charge electric vehicles. So a lot of the the lithium and the minerals that they're mining, that they're evaporating tons of water at the Great Salt Lake that we're sending our fresh drinking water to and we conserve, right, is being mined for these minerals to essentially roll this system out, all this electrification, which is part of why they need these AI data centers as well, right? It all comes together. So I guess that's just, again, so I kind of push back a little bit on our lawns and our gardens and our water rights. I think it needs to be us and our farmers versus all of these corporations coming in from out of state and out of country. And I think that maybe we can get to the bottom of that and agree a little bit more if we can get an audit on where the water is going.
Boy, I really have learned a lot tonight. It's been great to participate. This is like my pet peeve, the Utah media and its failure to really do its job. And I come back to actually what Ron said about that state house. So I've spent a lot of my adult life in that state house. I don't know why. I'm certain I've, in a past life did something really bad, and this is my punishment. But the amount of special interest in that body is shocking. I mean, proposed Bear River development is a $3 billion construction project in 2015 dollars. And so that's without interest. So we're talking $5-6 billion, and that's where we think all this water is going to, all these water rights are going to divert the single largest source of water to the Great Salt Lake so that we can keep just being sloppy in our cities about our water use. And that is going to make the Great Salt Lake disappear. I mean, that's just, the lake doesn't respond to press conferences. It doesn't respond to care, and it doesn't respond, I hate to say it, to art. It responds to water. And saline bodies across the globe have disappeared. And we are on this planet, and it is a spaceship with other species. And I personally don't believe that we should just be unconcerned about extinction of species that are disappearing from the face of the planet. This is the largest extinction event, since the dinosaurs, okay? This is a 6th great extinction event. And so we need to just ask ourselves if we want to live with this Great Salt Lake or not. It's not just gonna happen because these saccharine-filled media stories about non-existent water being saved that didn't make it to the Great Salt Lake. And we've got to stop pretending that someone's stepping forth and saying, I've saved water and therefore it's going to the Great Salt Lake. I've leased water and therefore it's going to Great Salt Lake. We've put $40 million in a fund and therefore it's going to Great Salt Lake. It's not making it to the lake. I mean, you can look at it and see it's not. And all of us are pretty clear on this panel. We disagree with each other about some things, but no one here is arguing that we're delivering all this water to the lake. Nobody's saying that. So if we're gonna, we just need to make a conscious choice, right? Those of us in, with spousal relationships, we're honest with our partner. We got to decide. Look, if you're going to go to Costco and you're going to spend $10,000, right? If we can afford it, fine. If we can't, let's not do it. So if we can't afford to share water with that Great Salt Lake, we have to pay the costs. And it's going to cost $20 to $30 billion. And we can't pack 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 million people onto the Wasatch Front that don't live here now and keep our farmland. It is gone. And when we want local food brought to us that is not imported from another state or imported from another country, it won't be here. So I think what's tough, and again, Ron said this too, the people are not showing up at the people's house. We're not getting people to go to the legislature. And that to me is the biggest problem. In the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin warned Americans about special interests in the federal government. Now think about that for a minute. That was the 18th century. And Benjamin Franklin was worried about private interests influencing government because they were in the 18th century. We have this idea that water is not a special interest. But if I want a $3 billion construction contract for Bear River development, that's a special interest. And I'm going to go convince everybody that we need to approve that money. And that is where we're going. There is a 1/16 of a cent of a sales tax for everything you've been buying for the last 10 years going to the Bear River Construction Fund. And we cannot get the legislature to stop funding it. Casey Snyder refused to let that bill out of rules when he was Rules Committee chair. So this idea that water is being solved by people with facts and data and logic is a farce. There are people on this panel that are solving their water problems with those tools. But that state house is unfortunately corrupt, just like what we know about American government. I mean, that's just how it is. And what we find is that our legislature does not want to let the people speak. The May 20 Natural Resource Committee did not take 1 second of public comment. And they said, we need to pass what was last legislative session's HB 501. We need to pass a tax on your water bill. They want to multiply 3% of your median income in your service area of your water supplier, and they want to put that into your water bill forever. And we fought it, but it passed the House. It passed House committee. They pulled it, and then when the Senate committees were over, they trotted it back. It was scheduled to be in the Senate committee, but the sponsor refused to debate about it publicly. So the sponsor went to the Senate committee chair when it went over to the Senate and said, I'm not going to present the bill today. So they pulled it, and they waited for all the committees to end, and then they brought it back, and it went straight to the Senate floor. And it almost passed. It died midnight of the last night, and it is coming back. If you don't believe me, go back to the May 20 Natural Resource Committee, where they took 0 seconds of public comment against it, and they said, if only the environmentalists would calm down, we could build Bear River development. And if that happens, that lake is dry. And there are businesses that are already telling me now they do not want to come to Utah or they want to leave Utah because of that. I field that question. My staff feels that question all the time. True or not, that is the perception. So if we're not going to save the lake, let's just be honest with ourselves and say, we don't care. And let's stop pretending that this game of water conservation, going to the lake because somebody writes a story or a press release saying that, makes it real. It's not. And we need to wake up. We are the people, and we need to hold our legislators accountable for the future that we want.
Can I just piggyback off that real quick? I'll be quick. Yes, and I think another thing is don't believe, like you mentioned, don't believe everything you hear in the news. But not every good idea needs to be legislated either. I think it's a really slippery slope when we start letting government dictate how we get to use our water, and if we already have a pre-appropriated water right, how much we get to use of that. But I think one of the things that has kept people probably from participating in Natural Resource Committee is water is kind of confusing, right? It's a really complex, convoluted, Utah has some of the most complex, convoluted water rights in the country. But in 2022, I wasn't involved at all, right? I just started getting involved in grassroots movements and took an interest in some of the narratives I was hearing, started going up to the legislature, sitting in, listening, starting kind of to read through their strategic plans and documents and looking. I didn't know how to read a bill. I had no idea what any of it meant. I had to look up, definitions. But I think once you start coming and just kind of sitting in and listening, and you kind of start to learn it, right? And you can pick up pretty quickly, but the more that you're kind of up there involved, it starts to become really obvious, the corruption that's involved up there, and you start to see it. And I think the more that you kind of start to come up and just hang out and ask questions, and you do start to get more confident in pushing back. Because I didn't know anything about water.
It's easy.
A few years ago.
It's easy. Come join us. We'll help you. We'll introduce you.
Yeah. But yeah, please come and show up, and we got to fight this together. So sorry, Jen.
No, thank you. I was just going to get to a call to action. So hug a farmer, put your kids in FFA, right? Because that knowledge is dying. It is, and it's we're going to be eating bugs because that's the only thing that grows without fertilizer.
Right, and a lot of us farmers who don't have children who want to farm and take over, what do we do with our farm? Nobody's going to take care of it. What do we do? So, we wait for the public to help us save our farms. Like I said, you run out of farmers, and here's West Layton, West Kaysville. Run out of farmers, you build houses, there's no more food.
Yeah.
So eventually, Weber County is going to do the same thing. We're in the same process. Salt Lake County, 1970, I was down there, I'm that old, to look at that. There was a lot of farms, lots of farms, western Salt Lake County. I don't know if you can find 1,000 acres in farming in the whole county. Davis County is trending the same. Weber County is going to trend the same. We're just going to be eaten up by development. And development takes our water. And as a farmer, I'm going to keep the water as long as I can. And I want to control it. Whether you got smart meters to tell somebody what water you're using so they can make decisions, I want to make the decision. I want to decide how I want to use my water. And many of the farmers I associate with feel the same way.
Thank you, thank you. And then does the South Davis Water District, do you guys have open meetings or anything like that where people can come and ask questions?
Yes, we do. Every second Wednesday at 4:30 at our office in Bountiful.
Okay, because I think Chelsea's right. Like, a lot of us don't go up to the legislature because we're not confident in understanding the solution. So Wednesdays.
Yeah, second Wednesday every month, 4:30 at our offices in South Bountiful. And we encourage the public to come in, and we have a formal public comment period, but it usually turns into a discussion. We don't just give you 2 minutes to talk. If you want to come in, we'll discuss with you and pick up ideas from you also. And I agree with getting up to the legislature. I've gone for 20 years up there, and I fought other bills. And a bunch of citizens getting together can actually really have an impact. But you have to put a lot of time into that. That's the problem. The paid lobbyists are up there full time. They're up there all day long. They're buying, then they have events for the legislators at night. They have got these guys so wrapped up, and we're in there trying to pick up crumbs and trying to trace somebody down as they come out of a committee meeting or something and get 25 seconds to say something. I don't know how we change it, but if we don't get more public up there and let them know that we're fed up with what's going on, this is going to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to also trespass Bill Gates from any Utah property.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, you've got a guy who's actively trying to take down farms, get rid of them, and now we're letting him come in and use water for his stupid geothermal projects and run water policy in the state. And I mean, he doesn't live here. It's ridiculous. So.
Yeah, yeah. And I think holding our elected officials accountable is a significant piece about that, because I think a lot of them don't know. A lot of them aren't even asking questions. How many of them ask you questions? How many of them seek you out?
You know, when we go talk to one of the parties about water, what we found is that both parties like have the one or two people that are the water people, and it's just totally not representative. And I'm like, well, but you know, what about your constituents, and what about you as a decision maker and a leader? You ran to be a leader. Like, you know, I've already talked to that man or that woman, that legislator that you're signing. This is a very, very complicated topic too. I mean, the thing you got to remember about legislators, you know, it's 45 days, and this isn't their job the rest of the year. And so if you elected me as a legislator, okay, I'd be great on the things I know about, but these guys have to vote on 1,200 pieces of legislation. And,
no, they don't.
And
they don't have to do that.
They don't read the bills, and
that's
they don't write them.
They don't read the
FYI.
bills, and so they have to formulate a decision on 1,200 bills. So like, if you can throw the whole tax code at me, and I'm going to be like, man, I have no idea
they can
how
also
to vote
choose,
on this.
right? But they can also choose to not suspend the rules the last week, where all sorts of.
Oh, I am not going to try and.
I'm not going to. Peanut, by the way. I'm not a.
I'm not going to put myself in the position of defending the legislature, because you're totally right.
Yeah.
But my point is this. They need to hear from you. They need to be educated from you, because you know what you know, and they don't know what you know. They don't, I mean, you know, they might be experts on the tax code, okay? But they don't know other things. They don't know what you know. You have to educate them, because otherwise they just come out in the hallway and they're like, oh, who do I know out here? Zach, have you read this bill? How should I vote? And I'm like, I haven't read the bill. I don't know what it is. And they're like, well, you know, how should I vote? I'm like, man, that's not my problem. I don't know, man. I read the bill. It's just very hard. Most of them just look at their neighbor and go in the House or Senate and go, what are you doing? How are you voting on this one? Okay, I'll do that too. Or they'll look and they'll vote partisanship. And that's why we're having so much vanilla up there.
Well, public comment's theater, right? They decide ahead of time in caucus. If you vote for my bill, I'll vote for yours, and if you don't, we're shutting yours down, and it's decided ahead of time. Public comment is just theater. And I think the more people that show up and start to make a ruckus and call them out and hold them accountable, and, you know, this excuse that, well, you know, later on after something happens, oh, that's not what we were told. We didn't know it was going to do that. Well, why don't you know it was your bill? Did you not read it? Because it's extremely negligent and irresponsible to run a state this way, where you just trust what the lobbyist is telling you, and then we just push as many bills through as we can without understanding consequences later. And then because the Senate is so corrupt, even if the House tries to repeal it later, we can't get it repealed. So I think that's another thing, is there's a lot of fear that gets pushed and emotion, and we're all gonna run out of water and we're all gonna die, and so we gotta do, and so it's just shove all these policies through. Nobody knows what they do. So I think we just need to slow down and hold them accountable. And if they tell you, I didn't know it was going to do that, or I didn't have time to read the bill, like, well, that's on you, and maybe we need to vote you out then if you can't, you know, uphold proper constitutional legislative processes.
Yeah. Ron, did you have one more comment, and then
No, I think we're about done here.
Okay.
My only thing is, though, the real one of the big problems up there, I think we'll all agree, they each have their own 20 or 30 bills, which is ridiculous in 45 days. So they got 20 or 30 bills. They have to get them drafted. They have to get them to a committee. They have to get them through the House. They have blah, blah, blah. They don't know what else is going on. They're so busy focused on their own work. They have no clue what's going on. And unless somebody's up there really badgering them and saying, hey, you know, that HB 501 really is a bad bill and you got to look, they don't have a clue. And the system it's a system that's allowing all of these bad bills to go through because nobody ever reads a bill except their own bill, and then they don't even know what's in it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. We super appreciate your time, panelists.
Jen, I hate to be a pain, but I just want to, if anybody has any like questions that, I know we probably can't go forever, but I do want to make sure if there's like serious concerns or questions that maybe we can get a few of those.
Yeah, we're going to have questions outside because
Oh, okay.
they want to
Yeah,
go. But wow, I mean, this tonight is a perfect example of why we hold these meetings. You are not going to get this kind of information anywhere. If you don't feel absolutely alarmed, and look at how many people are here, I hope y'all have food storage. I know this morning I listened to something about farming, and I went out and bought like $300 worth of canned foods. Not that that's going to do anything for me, but yeah, farming is so important, and all of this information is so important, and it's also so aggravating when you look at the political process, and the big elephant in the room is our electoral process is very compromised. Like, we cannot trust our elections. That's why our legislators, when they're up at the legislature making all these decisions, feel untouchable, because they really know they can't be held accountable. And, you know, probably the reason why Stuart Adams lost is because it was too big to rig. And I mean, I hate to sound so, but it is. We have to face the reality of that. And wow, it's so unfortunate that Brian McKenzie is back in. Anyway, so we have a lot of work to do. We can't afford to not step up. And I thank you all for being here. Thank you for caring and staying until the end. And please tell your friends, your neighbors about what we're doing so that they can come and they can get educated on the things that is important. And right now is the time to be talking to our legislators. Right now is the time to be in their ear, not during the legislative session when they're just like, they can't focus on 2 words that you say to them. It's right now. So thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful July. We don't have anything in July, but we will be back in August. So thank you for coming. And thank you to the Faith Baptist Church.
I'm going to make one last comment. Pray and fast for rain. The El Nino is supposed to bring a record-breaking snowpack here this year for those that are kind of fearful. But we have an almighty God that saves. So pray and fast for rain and snow.
Yeah, always. Thanks.